The Krell Dominion fleet drifted through the endless dark of space, their ships lined in perfect formation, proud banners of their empire glowing across their armored hulls. For centuries, the Krell had conquered world after world, and this mission felt no different. Their commander, Admiral Varys, stood tall at the center of the flagship bridge, his cold eyes fixed on the star maps. His officers moved with confidence, almost arrogance, for they believed no species could match their power. Space was theirs to take, and no enemy could stop them. Yet, that night, something began to change, something subtle at first, like a whisper in the silence of the void. A faint signal appeared on their sensors, so faint that most of the crew thought it was just interference. The technician who noticed it at first almost dismissed it, but then it pulsed again, steady, deliberate, as if something far away was calling them. The crew shifted uneasily, not because of the strength of the signal, but because of its unnatural quality. It did not match any known code, not from allies, not from rivals, not from pirates. It was something cold, something silent, and it carried a strange rhythm that made the air on the bridge feel heavier. "Admiral, we are detecting a transmission," the technician said, his voice uneasy. "The source is unknown. It is not local." Varys raised an eyebrow, unbothered. "Probably a probe. Or debris echoing a distorted signal. Run a scan. Confirm the origin." The crew nodded and obeyed. Screens lit up, scanners pulsed, numbers rolled across the displays. For a moment, the bridge filled with the soft hum of their machines, the rhythm of their instruments searching the void. The officers expected to see a faint probe drifting, or maybe an old beacon left behind from a forgotten colony. Nothing dangerous. Nothing threatening. The Krell had fought hundreds of battles and crushed every enemy. Why should this be any different? But as the scan continued, the signal vanished. It didn't fade slowly like a dying transmission. It cut out instantly, as if someone had pressed a switch. The screens went blank. The pulse was gone. The void was empty again. The bridge grew quiet. Some officers chuckled nervously, calling it a glitch. Others looked around uneasily, unwilling to voice their concern. Admiral Varys frowned, his instincts sharpened from years of war. He leaned forward. "Where is it? Show me the source." "Sir, there is nothing," the technician replied. His voice cracked as he stared at the screen. "The signal is gone." Then, without warning, the alarms exploded. Red lights flooded the bridge. Sirens screamed. The sensor displays filled with warnings, their systems shrieking with chaos. Across the screens appeared one chilling line: "Unknown massive object detected." The officers froze. Their eyes widened. The bridge that had been filled with confidence only minutes before now pulsed with panic. They looked out into the blackness of space, but there was nothing there. Their screens told them that something enormous was close, but the void showed only silence and stars. The crew began shouting, overlapping voices in fear. "It's impossible. There's nothing on visual. The sensors are broken. We are surrounded." Admiral Varys slammed his fist on the control rail. "Silence. Recalibrate the sensors." But the sensors weren't wrong. They continued to scream in panic, detecting something vast, something deadly, something moving silently around them. The void no longer felt empty. It felt heavy, like an ocean hiding monsters beneath its waves. The bridge crew stared out the massive viewing screen, eyes searching the stars for an answer. And then, slowly, shapes began to move. At first, they looked like shadows, tricks of the eyes caused by fear. But the shadows grew sharper, harder, until the outlines became clear. Long, angular hulls. Cold metallic forms. Black armor blending perfectly with the darkness of space. They had been there all along, hidden, waiting. Human warships emerged from the void like predators stepping out of camouflage, silent, patient, and merciless. The crew gasped. Some stumbled back from their stations. They had no idea how many there were, but they could see at least a dozen, maybe more, appearing from every angle, as if the fleet had been surrounded the whole time. Human ships, enormous and silent, closed in with a calmness that chilled the Krell. Their engines barely glowed, their weapons gleamed with silent threat, and their presence alone was enough to crush the arrogance the Krell had carried into the mission. They are not broadcasting any signals, one officer whispered, his voice shaking. They are completely silent. The bridge was thick with fear. The Krell Dominion had faced many enemies, but never like this. Enemies shouted in anger, sent demands, fought with noise and chaos. But these humans said nothing. They simply appeared from the dark, calm and controlled, as if they had already won before the battle began. "Commander," another officer whispered, pointing at the screens. They were here the whole time. And as the shapes of the human warships finished emerging from the blackness, Admiral Varys felt the weight of something he had not known in years. It was not anger. It was not surprise. It was fear. The bridge of the Krell flagship was silent for only a moment, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Then the voices broke loose. Officers shouted orders, technicians hammered their controls, soldiers demanded answers. The screens kept screaming their warnings, sensors flooding with red, and still, outside the viewports, the human warships glided forward in perfect silence. Admiral Varys stood frozen at first, his mind trying to make sense of what he saw. The Krell Dominion had fought hundreds of wars, destroyed fleets larger than this, yet nothing in his long career had prepared him for the way these ships moved. They had not come charging in with weapons firing. They had not announced their presence with threats or demands. They had been here all along, invisible, hiding in the dark, and now they revealed themselves with the calm precision of hunters cornering prey. "Target them," Varys barked, finally breaking his own paralysis. His voice was sharp, but underneath it was something his officers had never heard before: fear. The weapons crews obeyed, locking missiles and beam cannons onto the nearest human warship. But as soon as the targeting systems engaged, the screens flickered, then died. Every weapon readout went black. Alarms followed, declaring the targeting locks had failed. "We can't get a fix," Admiral, shouted the gunnery officer. His hands shook as he tried again, slamming his claws against the console. "Every time we lock, the system crashes. It's like they're inside our computers." "Impossible," Varys growled, but even he didn't believe it. The timing was too perfect. Across the fleet, more voices called in over comms. Weapons failing. Engines glitching. Shields unstable. The entire armada was drowning in chaos before a single human shot had been fired. On the main screen, one of the human ships drifted closer. It was massive, larger than anything the Krell thought humans capable of building. Its hull was sleek but scarred, as though it had fought battles the Krell could not even imagine. Lights ran along its surface in silent patterns, pulsing like the heartbeat of a predator. And still it did not fire. It simply watched, holding its position with terrifying patience. "They're not attacking," whispered one officer. "Why aren't they attacking?" The question hung in the air like poison. Because the truth was worse than battle. Humans were not firing because they didn't need to. They had already won control of the field. Every Krell officer could feel it. Varys slammed his fist down again. "Send a hail. Open comms with the lead ship. Demand they identify themselves." The comm officer nodded, his claws trembling as he keyed in the commands. A channel opened, but instead of words, static filled the bridge. Not ordinary static, it was a piercing, sharp distortion that cut through the air like a scream. Crew members covered their ears. Some flinched away from their stations. Then the noise cut off as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the bridge in an even heavier silence. "No response," the comm officer whispered. "They're not answering." The admiral's jaw tightened. "Then we will force them to respond. All ships, prepare for salvo fire." The order echoed across the fleet. But as the ships prepared, the sensors once again exploded with new warnings. Something shifted in the void. The human warships moved. Not fast, not recklessly, but in perfect unison, like predators circling their prey. They spread out across the Krell formation, sliding silently through space until the Krell ships were boxed in on every side. On the viewing screen, their engines glowed faintly, cold blue fire pushing them forward. Their weapons came online one by one, lines of energy glowing along their hulls. Still they did not shoot. They simply prepared, waiting, forcing the Krell to sweat under the weight of what was coming. "Admiral," a young officer whispered, his voice shaking. It's like they're toying with us. Varys ignored the comment. Fire, now. Everything we have. Dozens of Krell ships obeyed. Missiles streaked into the void. Beams of energy lit up the darkness. The flagship shook as it unleashed its cannons. The void exploded with light and fury. But the humans were not there. At the very moment the Krell fired, the human ships shifted. Some vanished into the darkness again, their hulls disappearing from sensors and eyes alike. Others darted aside with impossible speed, letting the weapons pass harmlessly through empty space. A few beams struck, but instead of burning the human armor, the shots scattered, deflected by defenses the Krell had never seen. The entire volley had been wasted. On the bridge, despair began to grow. Officers stared at their dead sensors, at their useless targeting systems, at the empty void where the humans had been only seconds before. And then, one by one, the human ships appeared again. This time, closer. Much closer. A heavy silence gripped the Krell fleet. They had just fired everything, and it had done nothing. The humans had not fired back. Not a single shot. Yet already the Krell fleet was panicking, breaking formation, captains shouting in fear. They're playing with us, the gunnery officer whispered. His voice cracked, and his hands trembled as he looked at the looming human ships. No, Admiral Varys said, though even he felt the chill sinking into his bones. His eyes fixed on the largest of the human warships as it drifted forward, its weapons glowing faintly, like the eyes of a beast about to strike. They're hunting us. And as the fleet stared into the darkness filled with human steel, the truth spread like fire among the crew. The Krell Dominion, masters of conquest, feared for the first time in living memory. Their weapons were useless, their ships surrounded, their systems failing. The panic had begun. The void was heavy with silence. The Krell Dominion fleet floated in broken formation, their ships scattered and trembling after their failed attack. On the bridge of the flagship, the air was thick with fear. Officers whispered to one another, their voices shaky, their eyes fixed on the dark shapes of human warships gliding silently around them. The humans had not spoken. They had not attacked. They only waited, and in that waiting, they crushed the courage of the Krell. Admiral Varys felt the weight pressing against his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to take control before his fleet collapsed into chaos. Reform formation, he shouted, forcing strength into his voice. Shields up. Prepare secondary weapons. We will not fall to shadows. But even as his officers obeyed, their movements were sluggish, hesitant. None of them truly believed his words. The humans had shown them something worse than battle, they had shown them helplessness. Across the viewing screen, the largest of the human warships drifted closer. Its hull stretched longer than the Krell flagship itself, its armored surface marked with scars from battles unknown. Strange lights pulsed across its sides, moving in quiet patterns like veins carrying fire. Every time it shifted, the Krell sensors screamed in panic. They're closing in, the sensor officer whispered, his claws gripping the edge of his console. One ship, right in front of us. The massive vessel came to a stop, holding its position with calm precision. It did not fire. It simply stared at them, as if judging, as if measuring. The silence stretched so long that some on the bridge began to believe maybe the humans would let them go, that maybe this was only a warning. And then, with no sound, no warning, no countdown, the humans fired. A single beam of white fire erupted from the human warship. It was not wild, not chaotic. It was controlled, sharp, deliberate. The beam cut through the void like a blade of light, striking one of the Krell battleships in the center of the fleet. The Krell ship never even screamed. 1 second it was there, a proud vessel armed with cannons and shields, and the next it was gone. The beam tore through it so fast and so clean that for a moment, the crew watching on the flagship thought they were hallucinating. The battleship split in half, its pieces glowing red, then vanished into an explosion so bright it blinded the viewports. The light burned into the eyes of every Krell officer, searing the moment into their memory. Gasps filled the bridge. Some officers stepped back from their stations. One fell to his knees, his claws shaking. No one had ever seen such precision, such terrifying power. Admiral Varys gritted his teeth, his heart pounding. One shot. One shot had destroyed a battleship that should have taken hours of fire to bring down. And the humans had done it without effort. Status of the fleet, he demanded, forcing his voice through the fear. The communication officer stammered. Battleship Caro destroyed. Total loss. No survivors detected. His voice cracked on the last words. Across the comm channels, the fleet erupted in chaos. Captains shouted in terror, some begging for orders, others screaming that the enemy was unstoppable. Varys roared into the comms, trying to restore order, but his voice was drowned out by panic. They destroyed it with one shot, a voice wailed. We can't fight this. On the bridge, the gunnery officer whispered what everyone was thinking. They didn't even aim at us. They chose one at random. Just to show us what they can do. The human ship drifted forward again, its weapons still glowing faintly, its silence more terrifying than the explosion that had just torn through the fleet. It was not gloating. It was not celebrating. It was simply showing them a truth. The Krell were nothing before them. Another officer shouted from his console. Admiral, our weapons are down again. Systems failing across all ships. Reroute power. Varys barked, but his own voice felt empty. He turned his gaze back to the human vessel. His hands clenched at his sides. He had fought 100 wars. He had seen worlds burn. But he had never seen an enemy fight with such cold control. The humans were not here to battle. They were here to send a message. One by one, the human warships around the Krell formation powered their weapons. The darkness of space lit up with faint glows, each one aimed directly at a Krell ship. Dozens of lights in the void, dozens of beams ready to fire. The Krell officers on the bridge froze, their breath caught in their throats. They knew what would come next. But the humans did not fire again. Not yet. They let the Krell see it, let them feel it. The threat was enough to unravel what little courage the fleet had left. All ships requesting retreat orders, the comm officer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. They're begging to run, Admiral. Varys closed his eyes for a moment. He wanted to order retreat, to save what remained of his fleet. But he knew retreat was impossible. The humans were faster, stronger, already surrounding them. There was nowhere to go. The crew stared at him, waiting for his command, their fear rising like a tide that could no longer be held back. And Varys, for the first time in his long career, had no words to give them. The silence stretched. The humans did not move, did not fire, did not speak. They simply waited, their warships looming like shadows carved out of the void. And in that silence, the Krell fleet understood the truth. They were not in a battle. They were in a hunt. The first strike had fallen, and it had broken them. The silence after the first human strike felt heavier than space itself. On the command bridge of the Krell Dominion's flagship, the crew stared at the burning wrecks of 2 of their destroyers. The lights of their consoles flickered red as damage reports flooded the screens. Panic spread through the officers. No one had ever seen the Krell fleet caught off guard like this. The commander, Vorkan, slammed his claws against the metal railing, forcing his crew to focus. He knew fear was already spreading like a sickness. His voice cut through the chaos. Hold formation. We are Krell. We do not break. But deep down, even he felt the shadow of doubt. Sensors continued to scream warnings. The computers tried to track the human warships, but they kept vanishing into the void. They would appear only long enough to unleash a devastating volley before fading again into silence. To the Krell crew, it felt like fighting ghosts. Every officer knew their training was worthless now. They were not prepared for an enemy that fought this way. 4 generations, the Krell had believed their fleet was unstoppable. But tonight, in this dark stretch of space, they felt hunted. Suddenly, a young technician shouted from his console. Multiple contacts, closing fast. Vorkan turned, eyes narrowing. The sensors showed a spread of objects approaching at high speed. The crew thought it was another human ship, but then the readings clarified hundreds of small projectiles were already inside their perimeter. Too late to intercept. Brace. Vorkan roared. A storm of missiles and kinetic rounds slammed into the Krell ships. One cruiser vanished in a ball of fire, its shields shredded in seconds. A second ship spiraled into darkness, its engines torn apart. The crew of the flagship gripped their stations as the vessel shook from the near hits. Sparks rained down from overhead panels. The smell of smoke filled the bridge. The humans were not attacking to test them. They were attacking to kill. Vorkhan barked orders to counterattack. Energy cannons fired wildly into the void, desperate to strike back at the invisible hunters. Bright beams cut across the darkness, but they hit nothing. The human ships never stayed still long enough. Their movements were unpredictable, almost like predators circling prey. And the Krell fleet, proud, powerful, feared across the galaxy, was now the prey. The crew whispered to one another, voices trembling. They had all heard the warning before this war began. Traders, spies, and even deserters had spoken of humans. They had said, "Do not fight them. Once you do, you will never walk free again." The Krell Dominion had ignored those warnings. They had laughed at the thought of a small species of earthborn warriors standing against them. But now, in the flickering red light of the command deck, no one was laughing. "Deploy decoys," Vorkhan ordered. "Scramble fighters." Small craft launched from the belly of the flagship, filling space with hundreds of fast-moving dots. The commander hoped to flush the humans out, to force them to reveal their positions. For a moment, it seemed to work. One human warship decloaked briefly, its massive silhouette outlined against the stars. The Krell gunners opened fire, unleashing everything they had. Beams struck true, cutting across its hull. The crew cheered, finally, a hit. But the celebration ended instantly. The human ship barely slowed. Its armor absorbed the barrage like it was nothing. Then, without hesitation, it fired a single broadside. The Krell's fighter wings vanished in a flash of light, erased in seconds. The flagship's crew stared in horror. This was not just superior technology. This was something worse, something designed not only to fight but to dominate. Vorkhan gripped the rail harder, claws biting into the steel. He knew what this meant. Humanity had studied war in ways the Krell never imagined. Their ships were built like predators, not machines. Each one was a silent hunter, designed to strike terror before striking flesh. This battle was not a clash of fleets. It was an execution. The flagship shuddered again as another blast tore through their flank. Consoles exploded, throwing officers to the ground. Smoke clouded the bridge. The crew coughed, eyes burning, yet no one dared abandon their post. They were trapped in a nightmare where the enemy could not be seen but could kill at will. Then, through the haze, a chilling sound cut through the bridge speakers, a human transmission. Not static, not noise. A voice. Calm. Cold. Merciless. It spoke in perfect Krell language. "You were warned." The crew froze. Vorkhan's chest tightened. He had expected rage or taunting, but this was worse. The voice was steady, almost mechanical, like it was simply stating a fact. It made the Krell feel small, powerless, already defeated. The crew exchanged fearful looks. This was not just war, it was judgment. The humans had appeared from the darkness, struck without warning, and now they were speaking as if the outcome had already been decided. For the first time in his career, Vorkhan felt true fear. Not fear of death, but fear of something far greater, fear of being completely outmatched. He steadied himself and forced his voice to remain strong. "This battle is not over." But even as he spoke, another explosion shook the ship, throwing him against the wall. He tasted blood. Screens flickered with red warnings. The flagship was crippled, and the humans were closing in. Outside the viewport, through the smoke and sparks, shadows moved in the void. More human ships emerged, silent and endless, surrounding the Krell fleet. The trap had sprung fully now. There was no escape. And Vorkhan finally understood the warning. Last line of Part 4, the humans hadn't just come to fight, they had come to end the war before it ever began. The Krell Dominion fleet was in chaos. The once proud ships that had crossed half the galaxy now looked broken, scattered, and confused. Their sleek black armor was scarred with burns. Their weapon batteries fired wildly into empty space. Their sensor screens were a storm of false readings, alarms, and ghost signals. Nothing made sense anymore. Commander Rahkor stood on the bridge of his flagship, hands gripping the command rail so hard that his claws dug into the metal. His officers shouted across the control pit, trying to make sense of the madness. One officer yelled about enemy ships on their flank, another shouted that the signals were illusions, and a third begged for orders. Rahkor could not speak. His heart raced, and a sick, heavy feeling grew inside his chest. The humans had not even fired their full weapons. They had not needed to. The humans had let the Krell destroy themselves. Then it came again, the voice. A deep, cold broadcast that seemed to come from every direction at once, cutting through their comm systems like a knife. It was human, calm but heavy with power. You were warned. You didn't listen. Every alien on the bridge froze. The voice did not shout, it did not threaten. It simply told the truth, and that truth was heavier than any weapon. You thought you could hunt us. You thought you could enslave us. You thought wrong. The comms went silent. For a long, endless moment, all that could be heard was the faint hum of broken machinery and the breathing of terrified officers. Then the Krell's main screen lit up again. One of their smaller ships was gone, simply gone. No explosion. No trace. Just vanished from their formation. The crew screamed as if they had seen death itself. They are pulling us apart. One by one, a junior officer shouted. We can't even see them. Rahkor slammed his fist down on the rail, but even he could not hide the fear in his eyes. He knew his people's history. For centuries, the Krell had conquered weaker races by showing overwhelming strength, by crushing the enemy's spirit before the battle even began. But here, the humans had turned that same tactic against them. The Krell fleet was breaking without even knowing what weapon had been used. Suddenly, something shifted on the screen. For the first time, the shadowy outlines of the human ships became visible. They did not move fast or frantic. They moved with calm, steady purpose, like hunters who had already trapped their prey. The human flagship moved forward. Its design was unlike anything the Krell had imagined: sharp lines, layered armor, weapons glowing with restrained energy. It looked less like a warship and more like a verdict carved into steel. And then, in the middle of the silence, a human face appeared on the comms. The translation systems scrambled to match the words, but the tone of the voice carried its meaning perfectly. You came to our space uninvited. You aimed your guns at our world. You thought humans were prey. But humans do not kneel. The bridge of the Krell flagship was silent. No one dared move. Even Rahkor felt his knees weaken. The human commander leaned closer to the screen. His eyes were steady, unshaken, filled with something that the Krell did not understand, something far stronger than arrogance or pride. Run if you wish. But wherever you run, we will find you. Attack us again, and your dominion will not survive the year. The screen cut to black. Rahkor felt his entire body tremble. Around him, his officers whispered in terror. Some begged him to order retreat. Others said nothing, staring blankly as if their minds had already broken. Then the worst moment came. From the void outside, every human warship powered up its weapons. The energy spikes lit up the Krell sensors like blinding suns. It was more power than their entire fleet could handle. The Krell officers screamed, preparing for their final moment. But the strike never came. The human ships held their fire. They waited, weapons hot, making sure the Krell knew exactly what mercy looked like. And for the first time in his life, Rahkor, a commander of the Krell Dominion, gave the order that no Krell had ever spoken before. Retreat. The word burned in his throat. It felt like poison. But he knew it was the only way his fleet would survive even one more hour. The alien ships turned, broken formations limping back into the void. Every Krell soldier carried the same heavy thought: they had not just been defeated, they had been spared. As the Dominion fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the human warships faded back into the black, cloaking themselves once again in the silence of space. But the message had been delivered. The Krell had tested humanity. They had seen the ghost ships rise from the dark. They had felt their senses scream in terror. They had heard the human voice tell them a truth that could not be forgotten. Once you fight humans, you never walk free again. And deep inside, Commander Harcourt knew this was only the beginning. The battlefield of stars burned with wreckage. Alien ships of the Krell Dominion scattered in every direction, their formation broken like shattered glass. The silence of deep space was filled with the static of broken comms, desperate cries, and the echo of failed orders. Human warships floated in the darkness like silent predators, their weapons glowing faintly. The trap had been set perfectly, and the Krell had walked right into it. On the Krell flagship, Commander Zorin clutched the edge of the control table. His scaled hands shook as he stared at the holographic map of the battle. Red icons, his fleet, were vanishing one by one. Green icons, the humans, were growing in number, appearing where none had been seen before. "They're everywhere," whispered his second officer, her voice trembling. "They were waiting for us." "How did they know?" Zorin's chest tightened. For cycles, the Krell Dominion had studied countless species, absorbing worlds, enslaving armies, breaking civilizations with cold precision. Never once had they been outmaneuvered like this. But the humans, these strange creatures, fought differently. They didn't fight like prey. They didn't even fight like predators. They fought like ghosts. He slammed his hand against the table. "Focus the fire. Target their largest ship. Break their core." But as soon as the order left his mouth, the sensors screamed again. Another wave of human warships appeared from the shadows. They had been hidden in the asteroid belt, cloaked by gravity and silence. Their cannons lit the darkness, unleashing a storm of energy. Krell cruisers exploded like fragile shells, ripped apart in seconds. The crew gasped in horror. "Commander, they're herding us." Zorin's eyes widened. He saw it now, the humans weren't simply destroying ships. They were cutting off paths, forcing the Krell fleet into a tighter and tighter circle, like prey driven into a trap. Every move he made, the humans were already one step ahead. A young officer shouted, "If we don't retreat now, we'll all be slaughtered." But retreat was no longer possible. Human ships had sealed every escape vector. The Krell were locked in. On the human flagship Eclipse, Admiral Rayner stood tall, his eyes calm as steel. Around him, the human crew worked with precise silence. No one celebrated. No one cheered. This was not victory yet. This was control. "They've fallen into position," reported his tactical officer. Rayner gave a single nod. "Tighten the net. Leave them no way out." The human fleet moved like one organism, each ship sliding into place without hesitation. It was not chaos, it was orchestration. Every blast of fire was measured, every explosion calculated. The Krell fleet was not being destroyed in rage, it was being dismantled with cold, patient strategy. "Sir," the comms officer said, "we are intercepting enemy transmissions. Their commander is panicking." Rayner's voice was low, firm. "Good. Let him panic. Fear is the sharpest weapon we have." Back on the Krell flagship, panic spread like fire. Officers shouted over each other, trying to make sense of the impossible battle. Ships screamed for reinforcements, but none could answer. One officer's eyes went wide. "Commander, they are not just fighting us, they are studying us. Every time we change formation, they adjust instantly." Zorin's blood ran cold. He understood. The humans weren't just trapping them. They were learning. They were testing weaknesses, observing tactics, and recording everything. A chilling thought struck him. This was never just a battle. This is an experiment. On the Eclipse, Admiral Rayner watched the screen carefully. "They are trying to break left. Titan Sector 9. Instantly, the humans shifted. A group of cruisers closed the gap, cutting off the Krell's desperate attempt to escape. Another burst of fire followed, and 3 alien warships were gone in seconds. Rayner finally spoke the words his crew had been waiting for. "Bring the commander's ship into the net. Do not destroy it. Force him to see." The humans focused fire not to kill, but to corner. The Krell flagship shook violently as explosions lit the void around it. One by one, its escorts fell. The ship was left alone, bleeding energy, surrounded by human steel. On the bridge of the Krell flagship, silence fell. The crew stared at the humans that circled them like wolves. Every escape route was gone. Every weapon offline. Zorin's voice cracked. Why are they not finishing us? The humans could have destroyed them in seconds. But they didn't. Instead, they waited, letting the silence press down like a weight. Then, the human comms broke through. "This is Admiral Rayner of the United Earth Fleet," the voice said, steady and cold. "You trespassed into our space. You attacked our ships. And now you will learn. No one fights humans and walks free again." Zorin's breath froze. His crew looked at him in horror. For the first time in his life, the commander of the mighty Krell Dominion felt true fear. The last line of Part 6, "The humans didn't need to kill them to win, the humans had already broken their spirit."